Preparing for war is not the job of the MOD or of the armed forces. It's the job of the country. Armed forces fight battles, countries fight war.
I'm back with Chris Donnelly, the Russia expert who we met at the start of the previous episode. He was born in 1946, a year after Allied forces defeated the Nazis in the Second World War. But the scars from that conflict ran deep.
Everyone of my generation grew up in a world very heavily in the shadow of a war for national survival, which had just finished and only just by the skin of our teeth been won. When I was a child, food was rationed. Even as I was growing up, right until the mid-50s, petrol was rationed. The world was so badly damaged. There had been so much destruction that everything was expensive, everything was hard to get, everything was grey.
As we sit in his living room, Chris explains to me how that kind of reality creates an inbuilt sense of resilience within a society.
That's the first place to start, and that's the most important place because it goes into your heart. The second thing which goes into the brain is the logic of all the structures with which we emerged from the Second World War and converted to cope with the Cold War.
That, of course, included prioritising the funding and equipping of large armed forces ready to fight the then Soviet Union at any moment. But it also involved maintaining a civilian population that was prepared for the worst, even nuclear war.
So a very large civil defence organisation across the country.
What was that? What did it look like?
It took volunteers, it had uniforms.
What was it called?
Civil Defence.
Oh, right. Okay.
CD. Its function was to mobilise in every town and village quite a large percentage of the population who would, in event of future war, and that might well be a nuclear war, protect the population in the sense of training them to get into shelters, run the recovery systems, support the emergency services, so that a massive expansion of that, and support law and order.
When the Cold War ended, though, as well as reducing the size of its military, the government also chose to allow society's readiness for armed conflict to fade.
As a nation, we have lost this understanding that when bad things happen, we may have to change the whole structure, the priorities, the spending patterns of how the country's run and how our lives work. And a shorthand for that is saying we have to be able to move from a peacetime footing to a wartime footing.
What would you think if you looked at the UK today from a Cold War mindset in terms of how prepared the UK is for war?
I wouldn't have believed it could be so bad.
And what do you think about the fact that there is currently no national defence plan as there was during the Cold War?
It leaves me speechless.
What you're about to hear is the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government. The main difference is that nothing discussed in this version is classified. Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The Wargame. I'm Deborah Haynes. Episode 3. Where's the war book? In the previous episode, Russia launched an armed attack on the UK in the early hours of the morning on Monday the 6th of October 2025. It was the gravest assault on Britain since the Second World War, with a barrage of missiles striking military targets across the country, as well as Terminal 4 at Heathrow Airport. We left the Wargame with Britain's military chief telling his top operational commander to strike back.
From the Prime Minister's perspective, the UK cannot be seen to be completely supine in this situation. Tell me how to sink a Russian ship in the next 30 minutes.
Sir Ben Wallace, as Prime Minister, is still locked in an emergency Cobra meeting with his team of real-life former ministers and military chiefs. They have to figure out what to say to the nation about the attack. Had the UK really come under fire, all key ministers would have been forced to disperse to different locations to avoid being wiped out in a single strike. As this is a simulation, though, they're staying put, around a long table, in a large room, in the basement of a building in central London. The following events take place between around 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning.
What we need to work out is very simple initial advice to public. 5 points, 6 points, whatever. Stay at home, essential workers report to hospitals, and prepare someone. We get the leader of the House to get in touch with the Speaker, try and bring Parliament sitting earlier. 2 statements, I expect, one from Chancellor, one from the Home Secretary, if you want to lead on that, where we make very clear. But in the meantime, so when they wake up and it's on the radio, there are 5 or 6 points. We can always loosen those, but let's start off so people know what to do.
The Press Secretary, played by Victoria McInnes, has a suggestion.
We should also ensure, Prime Minister, we're using the Home Office alert system so that everybody will wake up to it on their phones, not just on the radio.
So let me tell you something. I don't even know what the Home Office alert system is. It has been probably so underused. How do we get it? Is it on the radio? Is it on the television?
You get a very loud noise on your phone.
That'll wake them all up, Prime Minister, I can assure you.
Right.
It would say, wakes you up, and then what?
Emergency alerts are being sent to tens of millions of mobile phones across the country, letting people know the UK has been attacked. This is what you would actually hear. The government in the real world introduced the alert system in 2023 when they ran a nationwide test. Another test is planned for this year. Like air raid sirens during World War II, it would be the modern-day sound of the UK at war, provided the mobile networks are still working. Imagine how that would feel to be woken before dawn by this sound and a message telling you that Russia has launched missile strikes against targets across Britain.
We understand that RAF jets are still airborne in case of further strikes. 2 people have died, but officials warn the toll will likely rise.
The government knows it needs to do everything possible to reassure the public and prevent panic, even as it struggles to rally NATO allies to help the UK fight back.
Has declared a state of emergency.
Okay. Before I address the nation, can we just make sure there are comms going out about reassurance, what we've been doing? The government has met, the government is talking to allies, just a running narrative to give people reassurance that we are active on their behalf and doing stuff, and just making sure that we are listening and we are available.
He asks Amber Rudd, as the Home Secretary, to liaise with the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments. He also needs her to speak with dozens of local resilience forums that played a key role during the COVID crisis, though none have experience of responding to war.
Prime Minister, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware the scale of the damage that's already taken place and the strain that emergency services are already under, and the fact that local government do not really know what to do. And I will speak to the Secretary of State for local government, but we do not yet have in place any guidance for the local governments about how to behave in these sort of emergencies. They are, at the moment, completely at sea of how to behave, what to prioritise, and we will try to put in place some of those structures for them.
We used to have the war book, as they called it,
Do we still have a war book?
No, we don't.
No.
That was abandoned sometime in the 90s after the Cold War or the 2000s.
I'm going to step in for a moment to explain what they're talking about. This is a fundamental weakness in the UK's national resilience that Chris Donnelly also highlighted. Can you remember how you felt when, for example, the government war book got shelved?
What did I think of it? I thought it was a great mistake. But for the vast bulk of the political and military establishment, the tide seemed to have turned in a different direction.
The war book started life around the time of the First World War as a set of national plans on what to do in the transition from peace to war. It was by no means perfect because the country was once again unprepared in the run-up to the Second World War, but at least it had some kind of plan. By the time NATO was established in 1949, this instruction manual to prepare for a conflict had evolved to correspond with war plans for the whole of the alliance. Marked secret and regularly updated by the Cabinet Office, the government war book covered so much more than just mobilising the armed forces during the Cold War. It also focused on the need for local authorities, industry, and wider society to be prepared for World War III, including the prospect of nuclear Armageddon. But much of that readiness was allowed to fade after the Soviet Union collapsed. The war book was effectively replaced by a piece of legislation you've heard the Attorney General talk about, called the Civil Contingencies Act. But this law is geared far more towards responding to terrorist attacks or natural disasters, not all-out war. When I asked the Cabinet Office about any update to a national defence plan, they simply told me, and I quote, "The UK has robust plans in place for a range of potential emergencies that have been developed and tested over many years." Back to the game.
Prime Minister, can I just raise that I know that obviously the major thing is security and the missile issues, but there are people who are getting out of their beds this morning and they're going to be hearing that there have been explosions in areas close to them.
Our Attorney General, Helena Kennedy, says people across the UK will be in a state of shock, fear and confusion.
Some of them will be heading for airports and going on their holidays or going on business trips. Some of them will be looking for whether they should be going to their work or not. There's going to be a lot of fear around, and I just wonder about practical advice to ordinary people. And I wanted to know what the Home Secretary felt she should be saying too.
Yes, thank you, Attorney. We have already announced that we've closed UK airspace. Mm-hmm. And Heathrow Airport is closed as well, so that's in place, and that will be available.
Other airports, Glasgow.
Well, yes, because
the airspace is closed.
Airspace is closed overall. The local government, of course, do not have a rehearsal plan to respond to an armed attack, but we do have structures in place as a result of the COVID situation a few years back. So we are going to be using volunteers through the local resilience forums. We can perhaps put that back together. And we should also think about how we can use volunteers to come into military assistance. So we do the opposite to the military assistance to the civilian authority, CAMA. It is regrettable that we haven't rehearsed this before and that we haven't been able to put it in place so local government have more information because they don't know what to do, basically.
The National Security Advisor and Attorney General recommend invoking Part 2 of the Civil Contingencies Act. This will give the government emergency powers to be able to do things like require people to stay at home, ban travel, and ration fuel.
So, PM, can I suggest you've got to make a statement to the nation, and you're going to have to do that fairly shortly, and you need some time to go through that because that is the crucial moment for the nation, and it's going to have to be. I don't think we can go beyond 6 a.m. for that on a Monday morning. So, can I suggest, assuming the attorney agrees, and I think from what she says she does, we can invoke Part 2 of the Civil Contingencies Act, which is emergency powers. We have been subject to an emergency which amounts to war or terrorism which threatens serious damage to the security of the United Kingdom. That gives ministers essentially emergency powers. and therefore to direct all emergency services to take the actions the Home Secretary set out, but it also means we can direct people to stay at home, etc.
As ministers focus on the home front, in a separate room across the corridor, the UK's top warfighting commander is asking a team of advisors for ideas on how to sink a Russian ship or submarine.
Could I ask you, Tom, just to put together a narrative in your own mind, how we do this? So there's a little bit of technical application to it as well.
Lieutenant General Sir David Capewell is supported by 6 experts in defence, security and national resilience.
Right, so the weapons loadout is going to be critical here. Who's got what?
One of them, Tom Sharp, was a commander in the Royal Navy who now works as a communications consultant. When David really was the UK's Chief of Joint Operations from 2011 until 2014, Tom worked for him at what's known as the Permanent Joint Headquarters, or PJHQ.
Oh, you're going to need these maps as much as me. I'll call them a chart, you call them a map, and we'll be all right.
In the Wargame, we've so far largely focused on the conversations taking place in the Prime Minister's Cobra meeting, as well as at the Kremlin. But David and his advisors have also been playing the game from the start, seated around a circular table in yet another underground room, discussing possible options and responses.
The issue we still have is that all 3 targets and SSN is the best way of prosecuting that.
The team uses a lot of military acronyms, but I'll translate.
Using the Cold War mentality of giving them a bloody nose underwater first up to send them scurrying back, hopefully. The first order of battle is to sink one of their SSNs, maybe more if we know where they are, certainly the one that was off Scotland, using a combination of our SSN, a Type 23 frigate with Merlin and or the P8, whichever gets there first.
An SSN is an attack submarine armed with cruise missiles and torpedoes, while a frigate is a medium-sized warship that can be fitted with radars to hunt for submarines. Merlin helicopters and P-8 maritime patrol aircraft can do this as well. What Tom's saying is that a submarine is the best way to strike back against Russia, and they should aim to take out one or more of the Russian submarines.
It's helpful that the one that we've seen is next door to Lossiemouth.
Sir Bernard Grey used to be the top civil servant in charge of procuring and maintaining military equipment. The place he's referring to, Lossiemouth, is on the north coast of Scotland. It's where the UK's fleet of P-8 maritime patrol aircraft is based. These planes are a kind of military version of a Boeing 737 airliner, which he may have flown on as a passenger, but this one's armed with missiles. Both Tom and Bernard want to target the Russian submarine that chose to surface off the Scottish coast the previous day next to a passenger ferry.
And therefore, From that point of view, I would be prosecuting the area with as much
everything
of P8 as we've got. That's bearing in mind it's the P8 base. Our quickest remedy for the Prime Minister's point of view is finding and prosecuting
that one.
We know it's an SSN. We know where it is, and we've got all of our ASW aircraft within 50 miles.
ASW means anti-submarine warfare, so anything that can find, track and destroy submarines.
That's a good point. That's easily the quickest way to strike back.
Tom also suggests sending a submarine to target the flotilla of Russian warships that attacked the UK.
And then we can allocate one SSN to their surface fleet. That is a high-risk mission, but it's something that my submarine chums would very much like to get involved in. I've spoken to them. And in theory, if they can get in amongst that task group, they could cause merry hell. But it's high risk because there are still 7 of their SSNs, of which 1 or 2 will be allocated to this. So then it comes down to our SSN versus their SSNs.
He sets out some stark survival odds for the submariners who'd be carrying out the mission.
I'm sure they could get a few shots away. I mean, that submarine, I would give it probably a 40% chance of not coming back.
Back in the Wargame's main Cobra room, the British side has just received their first communication from the President of the United States via a post on social media.
He has put out a statement saying, "Stop the bombing on both sides."
The Prime Minister's press secretary reads it out.
The attacks on the United Kingdom and inside Russia this past week should never have happened, and they are sad to see. The United States is ready to negotiate an end to the fighting. My administration wants peace. Whoever seeks war will regret it. That came out about 10 minutes ago.
OK, so not very helpful. Meanwhile, however, unusually, the US Navy has been ordered into the North Atlantic to conduct surveillance. 2 carrier groups are being readied or diverted immediately to the region, so I understand, which is potentially positive news.
This could be important if they're ultimately allowed to help the UK. American aircraft carriers are giant warfighting platforms. Each one will be loaded with dozens of fast jets and protected by a task force of warships and submarines.
Very interesting.
Also very alert to the movement of the American warships is the Russian team. A weakening of US support for the UK has emboldened the Kremlin in this crisis. But Moscow knows that Washington is not its close friend either. Well, not yet. The Russian president, played by Keir Giles, is asking his team for an assessment of the damage inflicted on Britain by their missile strikes. Swedish defence expert Maria Enqvist is in the role of Russia's military spy chief, while Finnish naval analyst Robin Hagblom, speaking via video link, is pretending to be a Russian admiral and commander of the Northern Fleet.
Do we see anything, Chief of Military Intelligence, from UK news reporting yet or any other sources?
Mr. President, our assessment is that the strike on Portsmouth has been successful. UK media reports on the locations of our strikes are sparse at best. Our operators can confirm that the damage at Portsmouth is substantial.
Thank you very much. Admiral, did you receive all of that?
Yes, that is understood. My recommendation is that we will follow up the first wave with the second wave targeting the capabilities left.
Thank you. We will proceed as scheduled.
The Russian attack isn't just being fought by warships, jets, and submarines, though. The Kremlin is also using information as a weapon to undermine and isolate the UK. The president asks his spy chief for an update on what he calls information warfare measures.
Please brief me on the information warfare measures that your services have prepared against the United Kingdom.
Yes, Mr. President. We have prepared 2 options here to direct the narrative. The first is, how dare the UK media blame Russia for this? We will frame it as being all Russophobia by the aggressive British government. And the second one, if it really is Russia, it has indeed been provoked by the UK, which must now back down from supporting Ukraine, most and for all. Also, one of our agents is already out on the BBC saying that this is a result of the UK's provocation of Russia over the years.
The spreading of multiple conflicting lies is a classic form of Russian disinformation. It was used to try to cast doubt on British evidence that Russia carried out the Salisbury spy poisonings in 2018. Moscow has always denied involvement. The Kremlin also deployed the same kind of tactic to justify its full-scale war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin denied up until the last moment that he had any plans to launch an attack, even as more than 100,000 Russian troops massed along Ukraine's border.
Должен констатировать, что эти учения имеют сугубо оборонительный характер и никому не угрожают.
On the 18th of February 2022, the Russian leader told a news conference his soldiers are just on a defensive exercise and wouldn't threaten anyone. 6 days later, they invaded. The Russian disinformation creates yet another battlefield for the UK, one that it has to fight across social media platforms as well as more traditional news sites.
So we've got kind of agents of influence are putting out that this is an appropriate response to British imperialism. So that's something that we need to be aware of, is now very openly in the global media.
Back in the Cobra meeting, the press secretary is briefing the British team.
The other point to make is that it has now been over an hour since the first strikes landed, and we have not made any public response. We need to consider that in terms of the priorities and actions and timing to provide reassurance.
She wants the Prime Minister to broadcast his address to the nation as soon as possible, so his words can push back hard against the Russian claims. The National Security Advisor, played by Mark Sedwell, agrees.
Can I just urge colleagues, we're going to get a lot of updates and a lot of noise from the Russians here. Unless it's central, let's take that out of the room, PM, and not allow you and your senior colleagues to be distracted.
General Sir Richard Barrons, the Defence Chief, wants to update the Prime Minister on options to attack the Russian Navy.
I have two urgent issues. The Chief of Joint Operations has made the very good point that any strike that we now make on that Russian flotilla relies on the strategic enablement that we get from other people's satellites and communications networks. So far, those have not been denied to us, but in ministers' communications with their counterparts, even if they're not going to fight for us, they must keep giving us access.
All modern armed forces rely heavily on what's known as enablers. You can't just send tanks, jets and warships to fight. They need data and other forms of intelligence to be able to find and hit targets. They also need to be able to refuel and to rearm. NATO allies rely in large part on the US for many of these enablers because America has by far the biggest military. Without this kind of US support, things could become even more difficult for the UK.
Would it be the case if in the next 10 minutes we readied and fired a torpedo, that it would still be able to function now in this moment without ringing up and asking in advance? If we were just to simply use a Storm Shadow, for example, that we would be able to do that.
So we need the satellite communication in order to make sure we know where the targets are.
The National Security Advisor offers a view.
But CDS, we have that at the moment, don't we?
We do.
So I would caution against asking in case they switch it off. I'd communicate in real time.
Yes.
So if they're going to switch it off, they switch it off after we've...
So I think this is all linked to the CJO's second question, which is, once we have... And we are likely to have sunk a Russian ship in the next 30 minutes. Once we have done that, what's the next play? Is there a démarche to say, that's it? If you want to stop, we want to stop? Because if we fail to de-escalate this, and my own view is that is more likely, and we're into a longer haul, then the finite number on our missiles able to shoot down other people's missiles, the limitations on the strategic enablement we get from common architecture, all of that is going to come later. We need our allies to send us their stuff, or we're out of the game within a week.
The UK doesn't just have limited capabilities to defend itself, it also lacks capacity. That's not just a question of the number of jets or air defence systems. It's also about how well they're armed. Like so many parts of the armed forces, stockpiles of ammunition have been reduced over time to save money. The military has also given a lot of its remaining weapons to Ukraine without receiving enough cash from the Treasury to replenish its own stocks at speed. Adding to the problem, the UK has far fewer arms factories than it did in the Cold War. Production lines are starting to expand again, but slowly.
After you've had about 7 of those attacks, roughly, I'll be out of missiles. So if our allies are not going to come to our defence, and they don't appear to be, they could at least send us their missiles.
The Prime Minister wants to prioritise fighting over fretting about stockpiles.
Our ammo stocks, woefully low as they are, should not preclude us from taking action, because keeping them from a rainy day isn't going to help anyone. We're already in a rainy day. So then I think we should take that choice. Secretary of State for Defence is authorising a chain of command then afterwards we can see what happens with our allies and friends.
He says the UK must send a clear message after it sinks a Russian ship that this was a proportionate act of self-defence following Russia's attack.
That in itself is a clue to the Russians that there is a potential here for a limitation, for a barrier. If at the same time they don't want to take that decision, then we'll readdress it then.
The Defence Secretary, played by James Heapy, is worried about the timing of a decision to sink the ship, given the risk of a Russian retaliation.
Pim, I'm concerned that the sequencing of your address to the nation versus the military opportunity to respond means that we could find that this situation starts to escalate in a rather uncontrolled way quite quickly. And I think, therefore, it is important for you to be clear. Do you wish to make your address to the nation with all of the messaging that brings internationally prior to taking any decision, or do you want to prioritise taking the military decision at the moment that is expedient, even if that were to come before you have addressed the nation? That's, I think, the key question for you.
Well, I think, first of all, does anyone here believe we should not, no matter when it comes, we should not take a limited self-defence strike against a Russian asset?
No, but one must think of what that action will be. We're asking one UK military asset to strike a Russian. The Russian asset may well respond.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you should assume that it will be taken as a single measured, discrete act. It may well trigger a response.
That is the risk.
Exactly.
I totally get that.
So I am hesitant, not to say reluctant, to see us use this so-called window of opportunity to attack a single Russian asset.
Jack Straw, as the Foreign Secretary.
Because I think it will put us on the back foot in a way that we're diplomatically we're not at the moment. We have the option of doing this, as it were, down the line. And to come to the point that CDS and the Defence Secretary and the National NSA advisor have also made, there's a question of what do we do next? And so we attack this Russian asset, we sink a Russian boat. They're not going to sit on that. They have more assets than we do, and they don't rely on other nations in the way that we do for our capability. So they then do something else. What do we do again?
But what do we know about Putin's track record? That if we don't do anything, Putin's track record is usually to continue.
Yeah, I accept that, but...
Would you say that's the same?
I think that's absolutely correct, Prime Minister. I don't think you should rush this. We've got a nation out there that is waking up, that has heard explosions, has seen this nation under attack for the first time since 1940. And you want to just take a breath before you decide exactly what the next move is.
As they're talking, the defence chief is handed a piece of official-looking paper. This new information, known in Wargame language as an inject, has been issued by Rob Johnson, the Games Master. The Chief of the Defence Staff reads it out.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I have to report that we have sunk a Russian ship in self-defence. One of our submarines in proximity to the Russian flotilla was attacked, and it has sunk a Russian ship.
What was the ship that was sunk?
The Russian vessel so unfairly victimised by a British submarine was the Vice Admiral Kulikov, which is a Udalay-class destroyer, so a valuable target.
So, look, I think what we do is we cash that in the bank. We say that we defended ourselves.
Yep.
And indeed, if there is any communications on that ship or any witnesses on that ship, we make sure that is in the public arena.
This is a significant development, the sudden sinking of a Russian warship. As you know, a British submarine had been tasked with trying to attack the Russian flotilla, but while on this mission, it was threatened and opened fire in self-defence. A destroyer like the Vice Admiral Kulikov would probably have a crew of more than 220 sailors. Russia's navy has lost a lot of vessels in its war against Ukraine, But this is the first time the Royal Navy has directly sunk a Russian warship in more than a century.
Oh.
We just lost the ship.
I see there has been a development.
Yes.
It's unexpected and unwelcome news for the Russians.
I would like now to speak to the commander of the Northern Fleet, if he is on the line.
Yes, the commander of the Northern Fleet is here.
Admiral, we understand that one of your vessels has been sunk.
Yes, we have unfortunately seen one of our large anti-submarine ships being sunk by a torpedo. Immediately upon this happening, we have launched additional anti-submarine helicopters who will start looking for any signs of the submarine trying to follow us, and in the best case, we hope to be able to identify its location and sink it.
Very good.
Unfortunately, this is the kind of losses one can expect.
Absolutely. I am sure you will be doing your best to recover whatever survivors you can, but I'm sure we are also all agreed that this is an entirely acceptable price to pay for the success of our operations so far. Does anybody disagree?
No.
The Russians then start to question whether the Americans may have helped the British attack their ship.
We cannot rule out that US intelligence has been aiding in the targeting of our vessels. We are currently looking into that, as well as going once more through all the sonar contacts we have to make sure that there isn't a US submarine shadowing our squadron.
Very good. Thank you. Keep us informed. So, at present, we have suffered damage, but nothing significant enough to change our course. Our only real concern is the attitude of the United States.
Yeah, less than expected.
Yes. It will be interesting to see whether the US have actively assisted the Anglo-Saxons or not.
I suspect we may not have a clear answer to that from the Americans.
It is something that we need to handle.
Tom's Rostock's, playing the part of Russia's military chief, offers a view.
This was probably implied when the State Secretary said that the US would pursue an even-handed approach.
It is fair to assume that, yes.
The Admiral suggests asking the Americans to help them sink the British submarine that fired the missile, if they really are being even-handed.
We can always ask.
That is an excellent question.
In London, the Prime Minister also wants to speak to the Americans, as the President had warned in his social media post that whoever seeks war will regret it.
And if you remember, his last word on his tweet is, I think they will pay. Wasn't that the line on his tweet?
It was.
So I think we need to go straight back to the United States and remind them that the Russians have, in a sense, done that.
He's referring to the fact the British submarine had been acting in self-defence.
Okay, very briefly, as this is sort of hot and live, there are other things we have to also consider. So our economy, Chancellor, with some urgency, whatever work we need to do to make sure that the economy, when the markets open, etc., we are protected.
Our Chancellor is played by Jim Murphy. In real life, he served as Secretary of State for Scotland in Gordon Brown's government, then as Shadow Defence Secretary in opposition, before becoming leader of the Scottish Labour Party between 2014 and 2015. In the Wargame, the Chancellor flew back the previous night from a trip to China, so this is the first time we're hearing from him.
Yeah, it might sound trivial to some people in the middle of an attack, but fundamentally our economy is absolutely one of the things Russia would be after.
You're going to have to think, Chancellor, about whether you're going to let the markets open.
Of course.
Or not.
Look, if this is a one-off event, then even what we've seen already today will have very deep and long-term impacts on our economy. But if it's more significant than that, then we're in entirely uncharted territory in the end of our lives. And we have to build an economic response that matches that. So I've got the Bank of England governor out of his bed. I've spoken to him 2 or 3 times about monetary policy. On the opening of the market, the stock exchange, look, from memory, it's only closed in September 1939. Even on 9/11, it stayed open. I want to talk to the US Treasury Secretary and others before coming to a view as to whether the market should open. And finally, this may be the last time I have a chance to speak to you before you address the nation, so I just wanted to implore upon you that we take a posture of peace through strength. If we are too weak in the next hour, this ends with our humiliation and surrender. And I stand alongside you and behind you in taking whichever measures are required to get us through this day and through these events.
A civil servant then hands the Prime Minister a note.
The latest flash signal we've just received, says that Russia's nuclear arsenals are being placed on the highest state of alert. So what we need to make sure is we get back against the United States.
The UK is wondering whether this nuclear escalation by Moscow could prompt the US finally to take Britain's side.
So, Prime Minister, it's now just after 6. You were due to address the nation just a few minutes ago. While you are prepping and doing that, Foreign Secretary can get us on the line to the US Secretary of State, who's apparently ready to speak to us again. I really think you need to go and do that now and have a quick glance at your speech.
The National Security Advisor is preparing his boss for what will be the most significant public broadcast by any British Prime Minister since the Second World War.
Prime Minister, come with me.
What am I actually going to do?
Ben Wallace leaves the room with his press secretary. They head down the corridor and into a small radio studio.
Take a seat just there.
Right, okay.
His team has already worked up a draft speech, but ultimately it's up to the Prime Minister to decide what to say. He makes his own handwritten changes.
The Russian missiles have impacted our brave emergency services. I've deployed to the scenes. We are appealing for those of you in the areas affected by the missile attacks to remain in place and to listen to news. It's important that you will be safe and easy to look after you if you remain at home. So stay at home. That's the first thing you do. Stay at home. Hide under the table, basically. Stay at home. Further advised will be issued.
Continue to defend our skies.
And I have to put you under a bit of pressure to get back to Cobra flights.
I have to do this. It's more important than anything else, okay? I'm going to read this out now. Right, okay, ready?
And I am rolling.
Right.
It's now just gone 6 a.m. on Monday the 6th of October, 2025.
Good morning. In the early hours of this morning, this country came under armed attack by Russia. This attack was unprovoked, illegal under international law, and utterly unnecessary.
So, Foreign Secretary, can I suggest you take the PM's chair, just for now?
Yep.
As the Prime Minister speaks, Jack Straw, as Foreign Secretary, moves into his seat at the head of the table in the Cobra room for a call with the US Secretary of State, played by Phillips O'Brien.
Secretary of State, good to talk to you again. Have you got anything for us?
Yes, I can tell you that we have spoken to the Russians and made it very clear to the Russians that we would like military operations on both sides now to end. We believe there have been attacks on both sides that have done damage. First and foremost, we would like attacks on both sides to stop, and we cannot state that strongly enough.
Look, Secretary of State, I'm sorry to be blunt, but we're between friends. There is a completely false assumption in what you've said. We were not remotely responsible for the attack on the naval base of the Russian Federation that has triggered all this. I do not understand why, in those circumstances, you are bluntly pretending that this is a situation where there was equal wrong on both sides. Why are you going in for this pretense?
We are not saying Britain or Russia is to be blamed right now. We do not have full intelligence.
The government has given license to our armed forces to defend our islands. Throughout the night, I have chaired Cobra meetings, and the government has given its full support to those armed forces to act to defend our nation and our people.
What we are saying is fighting should stop now.
Well, let me just
say that equal-handedly.
Well, I'm very sorry, but I think that history will judge the president and also, with respect to yourself, very harshly. Let me just tell you something else.
A UK submarine sank a Russian naval vessel that had attacked it.
our submarine had to take action against the Russian ship, and we sunk that Russian asset, what would a US submarine have done in this situation?
Well, hopefully a US submarine would not have been caught in this kind of situation and let a Russian get close enough to attack it.
Okay, how would it prevent that?
Well, it would prevent it by being prepared better.
Russia must understand that any unprovoked and illegal attack will receive a response.
Could I just ask you, are you aware that Russian nuclear arsenals are being placed on the highest state of alert?
We were aware of the Russian nuclear move, but the Russians have assured us that they will have no use of nuclear weapons.
The situation, I know, is very alarming, but our country has endured many attacks in the past, and I ask each of you to consider how you may assist in this moment of national trial. We are calling on our allies internationally to join with the United Kingdom to defend collectively and to fight back against such attacks.
We do not see any other European state at this point fearing that a war is about to break out. So that is why we would like to handle this bilaterally with the British and the Russians. We are going to follow the US policy as laid out by the president, which will look after American interests first.
The message is we are not alone. And Russia must understand that they cannot bully, intimidate, or strike us without serious consequences. Done.
Well done, Prime Minister.
The UK's isolation is yet another opportunity for the Kremlin.
The Americans tell us that they believe both sides are now involved in a tit-for-tat exchange which is heading in the wrong direction, and they are urging both to stop all military operations aimed at the other. I believe we need to continue with our SOTSIT, with our strategic operation for the destruction of critically important targets, precisely for the purpose of coercion to peace.
I agree. And we don't have that much time left.
Yes, it is time to strike. While we still can.
Coming up in episode 4.
I'm not clear what can be done to warn civilian populations who are in mortal danger.
We have to be honest about who has the cards here and who doesn't have the cards. And we're not quite sure that the British government and the British military has the cards to keep this war going.
The Wargame was written and presented by me, Deborah Haynes. The series producer is James Shield. The development producer is Jess Swinburne. Sound design by Tom Birchall. Original music by Tom Kinsella. Additional production by Katie Scholes. The editor for Tortoise is Jasper Corbett. For Sky News, the commissioning editor is Paul Stanworth. And the executive producers are Sarah Whitehead and David Mapstone.